discretionary function. And let me just explain a little bit about discretionary function. This is where you say to the court, you say, yeah, you know, maybe we shouldn't have engineered the road that way. Maybe we should have gotten to that project a little earlier. Maybe we should have known that there was a huge pothole in the road that cars would fall into. But it was within our discretion. We had more important things to spend our money on. We had more important things to worry about. We had other roads that were even worse condition. So this was a discretionary function. We shouldn't be held liable for that because we have to choose. We only have a limited amount of funds. We have to choose where to spend it. We spend it on a different road, so we shouldn't be held liable for this road. So let's see where the courts have said, no, we're not going to give you that. One situation where this has occurred, and this is in quite a few cases, where governmental entities have said, we chose the orange barrels, you know, those orange construction barrels when we were doing our construction project, instead of the cement barricades, all right? And the plaintiff is saying, you had, you know, those provide, I've got oncoming traffic, those provide little defense. You should have had the cement barricades, not the orange traffic barrels. And the governmental entity has said, well, we chose the orange barrels. We exercised our discretion to choose the orange barrels. And the court said, no, that's not discretionary. It might be discretionary in your roads manager to make that choice, but it's not the kind of discretion that the statute's talking about. The statute is talking about the kind of discretion where you actually make a policy decision. So you've done studies, you've looked at the costs, and you decided as a county, you know, this is the potential harm that could come to our citizens if we use the orange barrels instead of the cement barriers. We, as a policy, are decided just to use the orange barriers because it's going to save us X amount of money, even though we know that there's a potential offset of that, of more injuries to our citizens. So if that is the kind of discretion you're talking about, then yeah, you probably will get a discretionary function immunity. But just for a decision on the fly by whoever's in charge of the construction to use barriers instead of cement, to use the orange barriers instead of cement, that's not going to be discretionary function. One of the famous cases about this is the Carroll versus State case. This is a case where the county roads manager, I think it was a county roads manager, it might have been a state road engineer. A road had washed out, they put in a new road. So to bar passage on the old road, they put a pile of dirt in the road. And it washed out. And so someone came along, it was actually a couple tourists came along, they saw a juncture in the road, they weren't sure which road to take, they took the old road. And they're going down the old road at 60 miles an hour, and the barrier of dirt isn't there, there's nothing there, it's straight as far as they can see, except there's a huge gap in the road that they don't see, and they go right into it and suffer injuries. The defense was, well, this was a discretionary function. The court said no. The choice to use a pile of dirt instead of something better to mark that this was a closed road, that's not a discretionary function. Another rejected discretionary function argument was about designing traffic controls. And I use designing in quotation marks, you'll see in a minute why. This happened when someone was trying to go through an intersection and their traffic light went green, but unbeknownst to them, the other traffic lights stayed green. So both lights were green, they drove out, they got T-boned, and the government defending the case said, well, that was a traffic system design, safety design, that was a discretionary function. And the court said, no, not really. The court said, basically this was a malfunctioning traffic semaphore that was put in place by whoever you hired to put in the traffic semaphores. This was not some policy decision that you had made or a result of a policy decision, so you're not getting discretionary function immunity. Now, if it had been a true design flaw, so let's say you had a study done, an engineering firm came and said you need lights here, you need lights there, and you need lights here, and you had a certain amount of funds, and you said, well, we can put in these lights here, so that's what we're going to do. We're not going to spend our money to put lights over here. And then someone got into an accident and said, you should have put in traffic lights on this intersection, you chose not to put traffic lights in. That's a different story. That is discretionary function. Why is it discretionary function? Because it's a policy decision. You're looking at budgets, you're doing studies, and you're making tough choices that governments have to make about where to spend those funds. Let's look at some cases where it's been accepted. So it's been accepted for railroad crossing devices and signage. Counties have a duty, and they still do have a duty, even in light of these cases, to warn drivers about railroad crossings and to regulate them as well. However, in these cases, oftentimes what happens is there's just a sign for a railroad crossing. There's not arms coming down, or let's say there's a sign, but the sign isn't lighted, and someone gets hit by a train. And they claim that the county really should have had lights there, or that the county really should have had crossing arms that came down there. And courts have, several times over, I've got 4 cases listed, have said, no, this is a discretionary function. What kind of sign, of device to put in at a railroad crossing, this is a choice that the county makes. This is entitled to immunity. You're not, well, you'll get sued, but you're not going to get a judgment entered against you for that kind of suit. Same thing for signage at railroad crossings. Also, the decision whether to raise a permanent barrier. This is the Keegan case. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but what happened in the Keegan case is that there was a cement barrier next to an overpass. I want you to sort of picture this in your mind. A car, because of some flooding, loses control and then hits the barrier and slides up the barrier and into the foundation of the overpass, causing significant injuries to the passengers of the car. What they found out is that over time, the road next to the barrier had been repaved and repaved and repaved and repaved, and each time raising the pavement just a little bit. But the barrier stayed the same. So the pavement was rising, the barrier was, in effect, dropping. So that at a certain point, it became very easy for cars to go up that barrier and slide down and hit the foundation of the overpass. And the plaintiff said, well, government, you should have raised that barrier every time you repaved, because that's just negligent not to do that. And I think this was, this was UDOT came back, and fortunately UDOT said, well, you know what? We actually studied that. And we looked at how much it would cost to raise that barrier every time we did a repavement. And we looked at how likely it was that an accident like this was going to happen. And we decided that it would, based on cost-benefit analysis, be better just to keep repaving it. And then at a certain point in the future, when it got too bad, at that point we would raise a barrier. That hadn't occurred yet, so that was a discretionary call. We should get discretionary function immunity, and the courts agreed in that case. All right? So let's look at latent defects. These are defects that no one knows about that are in the road. Oftentimes they're because of an engineering error, maybe a defective material that was used in the road. The question on these cases, it's usually a question of fact. So, because it's latent, right? What did the county know? When did they know it? Because it's a question of fact, usually you're not going to get out of these cases on motion. These cases you're either going to have to settle or they're going to go to trial. All right? Because if there's a question of fact, it goes to the jury. That's the Picked Gun Club case, where it talks about that being a fact issue. Now, some fact issues. A loose water meter cover. This is an older case up in Ogden. Instead of welding, the city had a water meter. They abandoned the water meter, but instead of welding the top lid of the water meter on, they just let the weight of the lid hold it in place. An accident resulted when it flipped up, and the question was this the kind of defect that the city should have been aware of, should have foreseen, and done something about before it occurred. It went up to the court. I think it was at that time the Supreme Court, before the Court of Appeals was created. And the Supreme Court said, you know, this is a fact question. We don't know. The jury has to figure this out. And sent it back down. Same thing occurred with a defective manhole cover. The same kind of issue. Manhole cover, some people who lived nearby said, oh, that's been that way forever. Everyone knew about it. The city knew about it. The city said, we didn't know about it. And again, the court said, you know, this is a fact issue. Who knew what? That's quintessentially a jury decision. Send it back, let the jury decide. So, those are some examples of latent defect. Now, I need to say a few words. I know it's beyond Rs2477, but I need to say a few words about Rs2477 roads. These roads are unique in that state statute gives governmental entities, especially counties, broader immunity over these roads. So if the accident occurs on a road that was dedicated to the county as part of Rs2477, their county is not required to maintain the road. It's not required to improve the road. It's not required to put traffic signs on the road. And if the road is not classified as an A, B, or C road, meaning a Class B county road, then the public travels it at their own risk. So in other words, if you get a suit that comes in, and it's one of these Rs2477 roads, you probably have a good shot at an immunity defense because the statutes give you very, very broad immunity on these. I think it's kind of problematic because the courts for 100 years have said that counties have a non-delegable duty to maintain all their roads and safe travel conditions. So I think it hasn't been decided yet, but if those two issues ever come head to head, I think it'll be interesting to see which way it comes out. I'm not so sure that the statute is going to prevail. So let's look at injuries from the actual construction or improvement or maintenance of the roads themselves. So this is not some defect in the road or something in the road that causes an accident. These are usually harms to real property. And again, we got discretionary function immunity that applies in a lot of these cases. So a county's decision to build a road, a county's decision where to build the road, and a county's decision developing plans to build a road, these are all immune decisions. So if someone brings a case against the county alleging some sort of negligence in any of these areas, counties will be immune from those suits. There's no immunity, however, for executing those plans. So if you go out and in the process of widening a road or building a road, you damage a citizen's property, real property, you will be held liable for that because there's no recognized discretionary function immunity, unless the huge exception to all of this are takings claims. Takings claims are not the same as any other claim that can be brought against the county. They don't play by the same rules. There's no immunity for takings claims. To bring the claim, you don't have to file a notice of claim. A lot of people don't know that. You can just bring the suit under Article 1, Section 22 of the Utah Constitution. Don't bother with informing the county that you're going to do it ahead of time. Don't go through the processes. There's no one-year limitation for bringing a takings claim. They have their own statute of limitations. It can be as long as 7 years after the taking, and someone can still bring a claim against the county for taking their property. And they're also very factually intense. So, for example, let's say that the county concedes, yeah, we took your property to build this road, but we just don't think that we have to pay what you say we should pay for the property that we took. Still a fact question, still going to a jury. So in other words, these cases are usually somewhat expensive because you're going to go to trial unless you can get it resolved some other way. So there are more than one kind of takings.